Once there was an old woman who sickened and died. She had no family and she had no close friends, so it was her neighbors that prepared her body for burial. They washed her and they dressed her in her finest garments, because that was the custom in that part of the country. And they sat up with her on that first night, so she wouldn't be so lonely the first night of being dead. The next day the preacher came and he said some words over her body, and then everyone went away. And a little while later, the gravedigger came. Now, when this woman had died, her eyes were wide open, staring at everything, but seeing nothing. And try as they might, her neighbors could not get her eyes to close. But they found 2 silver coins on her dresser, and they placed them on her lids to hold them shut. Now when the gravedigger looked into the casket, he saw those 2 silver coins shining on her eyes, and they were bright and smooth and cool, and he wanted to feel them in the palm of his hand. And he didn't think about it. He didn't mean to do it. But his hand reached out and he picked up one of those coins. And it was just as smooth and cool and heavy as he knew it would be. But then he looked into the casket and he saw that one eye staring up at everything and seeing nothing, and he dropped it. He meant to pick up the casket lid and put it on. That's what he really meant to do, but it was like his hands had a mind of their own. And they reached into the casket and they snatched the 2 coins off the woman's eyes and shoved them deep into his pocket. He picked up the casket lid, and before he could look into it again, he slammed the lid down and he nailed those nails in tight. And he thought, ha! Now you can't see anything, old woman. And he took her out to the cemetery and he buried her down deep. When he was walking home, he had his hands in his pockets, and those coins were making a cheerful sound, clinkety-clink, clinkety-clink. When he got home, he made himself a nice dinner. He deserved it. He had worked hard that day. And when he was finished, he sat down in his favorite chair right in front of the fireplace. He pulled a blanket up onto his lap and he prepared to relax. But then a storm blew up outside of the house, and the wind began to howl around the eaves, making noises that sounded like people screaming in the night. And when the wind made that sound, some of it would come down the chimney and the fire would flare and it would flicker and it would pop and it would snap. And those coins that he brought home, you see, when he got home, he took them out of his pocket and he wanted somewhere safe to put them. There was a tin on top of the mantle over the fireplace. He put the coins inside, he put the lid on, put them back up onto the mantle. But when that wind came down the chimney and made the fire flare, flicker, and pop and snap, those coins began to go clickety-clink, clickety-clink, clickety-clink. Huh, that wind must really be blowing, he thought, to make those coins jingle in the tin like that, because, I mean, that's obviously what it was. It had to be the coins in the wind. Maybe it was time to go to bed. It had been a long day. He was tired. It was time to go to bed. So the man blew out all of the candles in the room except for one, and he put it by the bed. And when the wind came down the chimney and the fire flared and it flickered and it popped and it snapped and those coins began to go clinkety-clink, 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 he picked up his heaviest cast iron frying pan and he put it on top of that tin to make sure it didn't move. He crawled into bed, pulled the blanket up to his chest, and he tried to go to sleep. But the wind just kept howling around the edges of the house, making that noise like people screaming. Oh. And the wind would come down the chimney and the fire would flare and flicker and it would pop and it would snap. And those coins, even with the frying pan on top, would clickety-clink, clickety-clink, clickety-clink. As the man lay there, he began to think that the wind was blowing so hard outside that it might blow the door open, you know? Maybe he should put something in front of the door. And as he got up, he heard another sound outside, and it could have been the wind. It sounded like those voices he'd been hearing. And it said, "Where is my money? Who's got my money?" Well, he had been going to put a chair in front of the door, but he decided that the chair might not be big enough, so he moved the dresser in front of the door instead. And then he crawled back into bed, and he pulled the blanket up to his chin, and he tried to go to sleep, but the wind still blew fitfully around the eaves of the house, and it made that sound. Oh, like people screaming in the night, and it would come down the chimney and the fire would flare and flicker and it would pop and snap, and those coins over the fireplace going clinkety clink, clinkety clink, clinkety clink. And then you heard that other sound again, and this time it was closer. This time it sounded like it was right outside the door. Where is my money? Who's got my money? And the man pulled the blanket up over his head, and he began to shiver and shake in his bed, and he heard the door blow open, bam! And all of the furniture went flying across the room, and he didn't want to look. He really didn't want to look, but he had to. He pulled the edge of the blanket down, and there she was. It was the old woman that he buried this afternoon, still wrapped up in her winding sheet. Her hands were out in front of her, and her eyes were wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. And she just kept saying the same thing over and over and over again. Where is my money? Who's got my money? You got it! And that was the end.